Hi, this is the Minister of Goblin Affairs, here sketching out and detailing a locale map from the south region of Calthis that will be used as the setting for the first scenario playtest of Goblin Deals. I'll start out by lightly marking the barrier between the kind of mountainous region we saw in the region map and where the hills begin. This is just kind of a rough estimate. As this is a locale map, we'll be getting a little more detailed than we would with a region or a realm map. So we'll actually see where some actual mountains are, ridges, and the like. So this won't really be a rigid border, so we'll go in nice and gentle with it. Next up, we'll do the rivers, the two that we can see going through this hex on the region map. We will put in a few extra ones where we see it might there might be some runoff coming down from the mountains, or just a taste if you don't particularly care where your water is sourced from. As this is a locale map, it's about 1 day of travel across, straight through. Each of these larger subhexes is about an hour's worth of travel, and each of the little smaller subhexes is about 10 minutes of travel if it's necessary to track the player's movement in that scale. Not usually necessary, usually hours are just fine, but if they're exploring a location or following a river instead of walking straight, then you might want to track them in 10-minute increments instead. Start adding some color, starting with rivers, just as we did with the region map. Water sources like rivers are really important for living things like your players. Now we'll shade in the mountain and kind of plains terrain, though all of this is hills on this particular locale map. There will be some subdivisions within, so we'll go through and add the hills a little bit later, but we'll add some patches of forest as well after we've done the mountains a little better. I like to start by marking out the ridges of my mountains. These aren't necessarily the very highest points, but these are kind of the highest point in the area of the mountain. You can just follow along the ridge, and then it kind of slopes down from there. I find that looks the most evocative and useful. You can have a mountain at this scale. After that, we'll mark out kind of the bottom edges of those mountains. Some of them are going to be higher than others. I'm not really going to do a topographical map every time that I want to do a locale map. Not really necessary. Most of this can be done with description instead of actually marking it out. Going over the ridges now with a darker black just to make sure that it's very visible where they are and then it doesn't get smudged and then you lose the mountain ridge and kind of the definition of everything there. Next, we'll give a good solid outline to those bottom edges of those mountains, and then fill it in a slightly darker gray, just to show where the mountains are and where it's more of a valley. Of course, just because these are marked as mountains doesn't mean that they don't have any vegetation on them at all. It doesn't mean that they're entirely covered in stone. If you go and see a mountain, there'll be spots that are covered in stone. There'll be spots that there's enough soil that something can grow, some shrubs, some grass, some moss. Not just perfect stone, but that's the easiest way to represent it at this scale. Just going to add some smaller tributary rivers and streams flowing down from the mountains through these little valleys. Just kind of ties everything together, and those would be there. I'm going to go through now and add some forest in between these mountains and nice and close to it. There's no forest marked on the region map for this, but this is just kind of representing that there's copses of trees and smaller forests that aren't really large enough to be noted on a region map, but for a locale map, they are something that your players would be aware of and something that they can explore if they so choose. Just going to clean up the edges of these extra pieces of forest so that it looks a little more natural, less rigid. This will be the most tedious part of this process, is going to be putting in these hills. I'm just going to mark them by a darker spot in the hills and the forests, using the same forest green and just doing it darker for the forest sections, and using the same green as plains for the plains section, or rather the unforested section. Not really plains at this point, they're hills. Not much to talk about as far as the drawing of the map goes in this section of the video, so we'll just talk a little more about the scale of a locale map. A locale map should take about 8 hours to cross from face to face if your players are going just straight through, not stopping or doing anything else. It's about 144,000 feet or 27 miles. Each of the larger subhexes is called an area. That's 18,000 feet across. It should take about an hour to go through each of the larger subhexes. And then the areas are subdivided into the smaller subhexes, which are called zones. Zones only take about 10 minutes to cross, it's about 3,000 feet. You can keep going down from a zone onto a site, which is only about 300 feet across, and it takes about 1 minute. So you can fit 10 of these across in a zone, and then you can go down from a site to a spot, which is only it only takes about a 6 second game round to cross, so it's about 30 feet across, uh, and that's made up of 6 by 6 by 6 spaces, which are 5 feet. Everything in Goblin Deals is done with hexes, not squares or anything else. Debated on squares for a bit, but really hexes are where it's at for mapping. Now we can see that this locale map, you can zoom out to the region map and then to the realm map and know roughly where you are, but each time that you go down a level, you're increasing the amount of detail. We don't want to do the whole world as a locale map, that's not really necessary. Maybe if you were playing the same game for years and years on end and staying in the same area, you might end up with a locale map for an entire region, but it's only really necessary for the spots where your players are going to be for a while. Here I'm starting to mark out some areas of interest, points of interest. Number one being the caves that the players will start out at. That'll be their home base. The first scenario that we're planning to run for the playtest is going to be a simple, you're missing a family member, they're out in the wilderness and you need to go and find them. So that'll be the start and end of their journey. Probably going to keep it in just this one locale, just for a nice, easy playtest. Make sure that everything feels all right. Most of the other points of interest that I'm going to be marking on this map are animal ranges, so which aren't exactly just points of interest. They're kind of more zones, sections, areas that these animals are more likely to be. Now, the most likely place that the animals are going to be found is going to be circled. This might represent a bear's cave or a wolf's den, or a particularly good grazing spot for some deer. I'm also going to add an area that some outsiders have been living in for some time, maybe just a rival family or some scouting group. They're just staying in these hills here, and they come down for some water. So they're kind of around in the region hunting and gathering. So if the players move through there, they may encounter them or they may not. I'm not going to show what particular spot the lost child that they will be looking for is, just in case they watch this video, and that would kind of defeat the purpose of the playtest. That'll be it for the points of interest that I'll be adding in this video. I might add some more, but I'd like those to remain a secret for my playtesters. This has been the Minister of Goblin Affairs. Hope to catch you in the next one.